Hello, welcome to Trail Buddy. I'm Mark. Today we're going to continue. We're going to redo our hubs, bearings, and we're also going to do our brake shoes tonight and get our tires on. We've got new tires in stock. These are really pretty cool. The tread pattern on this are the closest to the Bridgestone without the hefty price. And we've got our tubes and our rims, and we are going to paint everything up, polish, and make everything look good. So we'll get into it. So last week, we took out the bearings on both sides in the front and rear hub. So tonight, as they're all taken apart, we're going to go ahead and sandblast these guys and get them spray painted with our Honda Touch-Up Cloud Silver. Okay, well, our hubs are drying from our Cloud Silver paint job. We're going to go ahead and replace these brake shoes. So we've got our front set up here and our rear here. So I'm going to work on taking out these little arms here, because what I want to do is I want to grease the inside of these innards here, at least on this rotating assembly, so it doesn't freeze up on both the front and the rear. So one thing you want to check out is on the front, you just want to make sure that your gear in there isn't all buggered up. This one looks good, and I'll probably start pulling out a little bit of this grease and repacking that just a little bit so that's all freshly re-greased too. So the finish on these is pretty good. They're not, sometimes these all get pitted, but this part is just kind of like a semi-polished aluminum, both the front and the rear. And the hubs are the parts that are Cloud Silver, also with the rims here. So we've got our rims that are pre-painted that are on our website. I'll double check to match, see how those match in the color. Often I like to give these a little bit of a touch-up paint just with the silver that I painted the hubs with. So that way everything matches like perfect. But we'll get into this shoes right here. One thing you want to make sure is when you grease up the pivot point really good, and inside here you don't want any grease that can get on your brake shoe. So I wiped everything down good while I was packing. So that way I don't get any grease that gets between my brake shoes and my drum.
Talk about that seal up there too.
Yeah, one other thing to do visual inspection is the seal on the inside. Now, most often, this is pretty protected really well. So you can run your finger along the inside. Make sure that the seal doesn't have any rips or tears. Most often, it's just gummed up with old grease, because this one is a little bit more protected than a lot of the other seals on the bike. But most of the time, I just like to repack this one with grease. You don't got to go overboard, but you just want to make sure that the gear, the Speedo gear, is encased in grease pretty good, and obviously you don't want your seal to be running dry. And I want to make sure my pivot point's good and lubed up, so that way that doesn't freeze up in the future. Okay, so in our brake shoe kit here we have, which is TB023 pair of brake shoes, says it right here. So this one will come with 2 springs and 2 shoes. So get these set up. A little bit of a dance. Get these springs to stay seated together without them jumping off. So what I've found over the years is the simplest way for me is I get them set up like this, get this all ready to go, and I'll take my shoes, turn it like this. I'll set up one side, get it to where I need it to be. Oh, and my spring popped off. Fix that a second. So if I keep pressure on it, the spring will not jump off. All right, so all the way around the side, I'm gonna try to hold this, but usually I go with one slip motion. So I'm over the little ledges, and then boom, replaced. Now make sure your hands are free from grease. You don't want this to all get greased up, but there is the installation of the brake shoes. Now we'll move on to the rear. Now often these get pinched real tight from the bolts clamping down really hard. So what I'll do is I'll go get a little hammer and maybe a screwdriver. Oh, this one will work pretty good. And I'll just lightly tap that in there to separate these two spans so that way I can pull this off. So it does have a little spring in here, a little retraction spring, so that can also make it a little bit of a wrestle getting this on. So we'll work on this, we'll get that out. There we go. This one's a little more nasty inside. You can feel that this grease is so old. It's starting to freeze up again already. There we go. Yeah, it's all packed full of stuff. Get a rag and clean that out. Maybe I'll get a wire brush here and clean out the ID of that. Get rid of all the... Careful not to use air on this stuff, this brake shoe material. I find the best way to clean this is even in a parts washer. That way you're not getting any of this crap airborne. It cannot be good for your lungs. So we'll run this over the parts washer a minute and we'll clean this one up. The last one we took apart for the front was really nice and clean. Just a little bit of goo. This one is so chock full of stuff. Probably being back by this sprocket, getting, on the back of the bike, tail end, picking up everything. We'll go clean this up. Okay, we got our parts out of the parts washer. They cleaned up pretty good. What you're looking for is you just don't want any hang-ups. You can feel that shaft. You don't want that to get stuck. And we got most of the goo out of the inside. All the old dry grease and dirt from over the years. So we will lube this up here. Careful not to overdo it. So we get the ID. Pretty much everywhere that little metal piece sits. Alright, we get the shaft cleaned up. Grease on there. Put that back together. And the most important thing is to clean off all the extra grease that you get done to squeeze out. That way it doesn't fall into the brake shoes. Get in between the shoe and the drum. Now's the time to feel if you got any sand in there. You'll hear it. See it. You'll hear a little grindy noise. Alright. This one we're good. So Remember to always put your cap back on. You don't want to get crap in there. And make sure your hands are good and clean. You don't got any grease on there either. Snap. And we are together. You don't have any extra grease. That is the rear shoe housing. And as we reassemble the bike, we'll make sure to get this guy back on correctly. There's a little witness mark here, but that goes on like so. That'll grab the lever and help pivot that and move that back to brakes off. So there's our rear. We'll check out how our hubs are doing in the paint booth, and we'll see if we can start assembling. Okay, well, our hubs are drying still. We're going to go ahead and put together our tire assemblies with our new rims. So our painted rims here. And a new tire. So put these together. Now without the hubs, we'll be able to probably put these together maybe like 90% or so. We'd want to make sure to take care we don't put too much air in this setup, because you can bend these guys if you really go to town with the air. But the easy thing about split rims is kind of a toughie, because the worst thing that happens, and it happens to everybody, is when you go to put everything together, you want to make sure that you don't pinch your tube between this rim as you're putting everything together. So get this stuff off, get ready. We'll put this little jam nut over to the side with our valve stem, or our valve cap. We don't lose that. And we will grab our tire. Now some of these tires got a little dot on them for where you're supposed to put the valve stem, but this one does not. We'll get this together. One side. Alright, now we got our other side here. After we put the tube in. So, my valve stem hole over this side. Okay. Alright, we'll get that put in there, and I'll go grab that jam nut I set over to the side. And I'm just going to get that started just to keep that valve stem from pulling back through. Not tighten it yet. So what I found over the years, what I like to do is kind of, I don't know, I'm going to take the tube, this orientation, and I'm going to curl it down up against the rim. So that way I know I can't get it stuck. I used to put a little bit of air in here, but I find that this works a lot better. Alright, we're going to make sure that that's not tipped. And we got our next piece of our rim here. So there's two sets of holes. We got our smaller holes for our 6mm bolts, and our bigger ones here for our 8mm. So we just want to make sure we get those lined like that. And we've got our stainless steel bolt kit here. So we'll pull out our 6mm fasteners, and we'll fill these up, the 4 of them, and we'll get this tight. And sometimes you need to get a Phillips head or an awl just to make sure that these get aligned. Now, one thing you're not going to want to do is you're not going to want to sock these down tight yet, because we're going to want to make sure we got room for our 8mm fasteners here so they line up. Okay, I took the time to separate these buggers out. So the sequence here is we're going to have our 6mm fastener, followed by our flat washer. Put it through the rim, then we'll put our lock washer on, and then we'll end it with our stainless nut, like so. So we'll go to that, and we'll do that right now. This would be nice to have 3 hands. That would be great. So I'm just gonna start them, and I'm gonna work across from one another. It seems to work easier. So we'll get it started. That way I can move it. Oh, see that fall right in there. Okay, there is our rim and tire assembly. So I'm gonna go ahead and tighten this up. What I like to do, I'm gonna go ahead and throw a washer behind this guy, just so it doesn't scratch my rim up. And it'll hold the valve stem a lot more square. There's another nut on the other side, which they're doing is they're just using that as another little jam nut, and it's tighten it here like this. So that way, you want to take care of it when you go to tighten this so you don't start jacking over your valve stem and twisting that thing in there. That would be bad. But this will be the same setup for the other assembly, and we'll finish this up and move on to our hubs. Back onto the hubs, got them out of the paint booth, painted up pretty good. Now we're gonna shove our bearings back in there. One thing is when I was painting, I was careful not to get paint inside of where the bearing seats. So on both of these units, I tried to stay away from that the best I could. So we'll start that. We've got our spacers here, and we will populate these with our new bearings. So for this one, we're going to use our moose bearings here. So we've got our front bearing set and our rear bearing set. And we'll get these opened up. Switch this around a second. There we go. So these are somewhat of a universal set. I want to say universal, but they list on all the other bikes here that they fit. So there will be some extra seals that are, it's kind of like it covers, I don't know, there's probably half a dozen bikes listed there. So some of these you will not use, but for sure we're going to use the bearings, obviously. So we'll get these are good sealed bearings, and we'll set these up in here, and we'll get them set in. So the front one does come with our seal that we will use, and we will keep these separate. Don't mess them up. But the right way to do this, or if you got all the extra right tools, is to get a little driver. And what that does is, if you ever pound on bearings, you want to make sure you're pounding gently, first of all, on the outside here, so that way you don't hit on the inside, because the only thing touching or keeping these together, what's isolating these, are a bunch of ball bearings in there. You don't want to put needless or unneeded pressure on here and try to pound on this and then, not the OD. So what I've got is I got a nice ball peen hammer, and I'll just gently tap around this. Now you can grate a chunk of wood, and then for at least for me to start it, what you don't want it to do is you don't want it to, this is over exaggerated obviously, but you don't want it to go in there like that crooked, because that'll just make a nightmare. It'll gall up all those insides, and that's no good for anybody. So start this. Here's my hammer. Make sure I don't got any sharp burrs on there that I'm gonna. What also helps too is if you get a socket that just smaller than the outside diameter, that's a great little driver too. There we go. So I'm just slowly tapping around the outside. Now the right way to do this is getting the, I'm trying to show a method that I used before I had the shop, but ideally I like to go over to the little arbor press and just push that in nice and square and flat. But most of us just have hammers and chisels. And that is, oh, so don't, this is unfortunate if you forget these. Otherwise you gotta get your puller, take out the bearings, and redo those again. So this one here, and we'll get that started. This sounds a little loud because I got a metal table, but I am not like going to top. I'm just gently tapping around the outside and working it in. All right, so I can feel where the hammer, now we're flush with this top piece, so we've got to get our socket here and work our way down a little more. Oops. Oh, this one is just a little too small. You don't want it to get it to where it's pressing on our seals here. That's bad. I think this one just works. So on this one, we've got this one will go flush here. And on the other side, we've got to countersink that. So what I'm watching for is I'm watching for this here to hit that spacer in the inside. Once we get there, then we're driven into the correct depth. Oh, so close. All right, we are hitting our spacer. Next, we got our seal. So this one, I'll put just a little bit of grease on it so this will go in a little easier. I'll lube up the inside just in case I forget when I go to put my spacer and my axle together. So most of the time you can get it started with your hands or your thumbs. And then what I'll do is I think I'll probably get a little bit bigger. Oh, this one will work. There. So I'll just pop in that seal the rest of the way, and we are installed on our front assembly. So the rear is exactly the same way. Just be careful not to hit these things too hard. I probably should be having safety glasses on, but I can't even remember how many of these I've done. But just double check your bearing, make sure that you didn't accidentally wreck something. Yeah, these are smooth and good. All right, we'll do the same thing to the rear. On to our last step for our rim and tire and hub assembly. So we've got this guy here. So we'll everything's kind of semi-loose yet, nothing super tight, and we haven't tried to put any air in here yet. So I like to get the hub in here before I try introducing any air in it, because I don't want this rim to bend as I fill this bugger up with air. So we'll go grab our 8mm units and we will put this stuff together. Okay, I got my fasteners. And one thing that I like to do is note what side my valve stem is going to be on. So for the rear of the bike, it is nice to have the stem on the brake shoe side. So that way on your motorcycle, that'll be not on the chain driven side because there's a lot of stuff happening here. So it makes it harder to get your air chuck in. When you put it on the right side, all you got to worry about is your brake rod. So we'll make sure to get that in that orientation. And we will go to do the install. So one thing to note is there's a lip right here, and that corresponds with the inside lip of the rim. You want to make sure that when you go to put it on your rim, you're not like on here. You always want to make sure you can feel it hitting that landing. And I already got my holes lined up for the most part. And again, all of my little 6mm are just finger tight loose, so that way I can move stuff around. When you're ever installing something or putting it together, it's always a good habit to get into just starting the fasteners everywhere. Once everything's started, then you can seat them, because that gives you the ability to kind of tweak and move things around. So as I've got this here on the for the rear of the bike, got our brake drum on our valve stem side. So now we've got our stainless steel set here, and what's different from the stainless steel bolts, I cannot find anybody to make me what's called a heavy hex nut. So as you put in this together, it's a good idea to get yourself a little flathead screwdriver and keep that on this nut side to keep it from moving or turning inside the casting. So we've got zinc plated heavy hex nuts. What a heavy hex means is it's just the outside of the hex is larger than a standard diameter nut. Get those together. And I'll go ahead and populate this up. Again, I'm going to get everything finger tight, and then I'll go around and then we'll sock them down. Wrapping up our assembly. So the last fastener I have to tighten is our little jam nut here on my valve stem. I was waiting to do that until I could get some air into the tube. So we went through the front and the rear, and we've got all of our fasteners tightened. It's always a good idea maybe to use a little bit of Loctite on those nuts, just in case. It's good insurance. But let's finish up our last fastener here. We'll get our air into our tube. Leaky. All right, so we got that seated, and we will tighten our jam nut on our valve stem. That will conclude the wheel assemblies. All right, so that concludes the video for tonight. Hope this was informative. If you like these parts and other parts, check us out on mytrailbuddy.com.